Something is about to shift in Cleveland, and it's not small. The Browns' front office is signaling that major moves are coming. Not minor roster tweaks, not depth adjustments. We're talking about franchise-altering decisions that could reshape the entire AFC North. And when an organization starts hinting this loudly, you don't ignore it. Because right now, Cleveland isn't stable, it's suspended in limbo. The offense was torn down. The quarterback room is overcrowded and uncertain. Draft capital is sitting there like loaded ammunition, and Andrew Berry is reportedly preparing to get aggressive in the trade market. The question isn't whether moves are coming. The question is whether they'll be smart moves or desperate ones. Because what happens in the next few weeks won't just determine who lines up under center. It will determine whether this franchise finally climbs forward or digs itself even deeper. Start with intro and make it around 100-200 words. Cleveland is on the edge of something big, and you can feel it. The Browns aren't just tweaking the roster this offseason. They're preparing to shake the entire foundation. Front office messaging has made one thing clear: significant moves are coming. The kind of moves that don't just fill holes, they redefine direction. And when a franchise starts hinting this strongly, it usually means one thing: change is inevitable. Right now, the Browns are stuck in a dangerous middle ground. The quarterback room is crowded and unsettled. The offensive line has cracks. Draft picks are stacked and ready to be deployed. Andrew Berry has the ammo and a history of pulling the trigger. But here's the real tension. Will these moves bring clarity or chaos? Because the next few weeks won't just shape the 2025 season. They'll reveal whether Cleveland finally has a plan, or if they're about to spin the wheel one more time. Right next section for 400-500 words. Cleveland didn't drift into this moment by accident. This is the result of an identity crisis that's been building for months. The offense wasn't slowly declining. It was dismantled. What was supposed to be a competitive unit turned into a patchwork operation that never found rhythm. Protection broke down at critical moments. The run game lacked consistency. And the quarterback situation, it became the headline every single week. Now a new regime is staring at the wreckage. When you inherit a roster in this condition, you have two choices. You either double down on what's there and try to stabilize it, or you start flipping pieces until something finally clicks. And based on the messaging coming out of Berea, the Browns are leaning toward movement. Take the draft conversation, for example. There's real debate internally and externally about whether Cleveland should swing again at quarterback if the right name falls. Ty Simpson at 24. Some evaluators think that's a reach. Others see upside, flashes of franchise traits buried inside inconsistent tape. He showed enough early in the season to intrigue scouts before injuries slowed him down. Strong arm, NFL-level physical tools, athletic enough to extend plays. But that's the dilemma. Do you take another swing at the most valuable position in football? Or do you secure help elsewhere, maybe wide receiver, maybe offensive line, and commit to the quarterbacks already in the building? Because every draft pick now carries weight. At pick 24, you're not guaranteed a true number one receiver. You're likely drafting a complementary weapon. Valuable, yes. Transformational, maybe not. Meanwhile, quarterback is the one position that can change everything overnight, for better or worse. And this is where Cleveland's crossroads becomes real. They can't keep operating in maybe mode. Not after what fans have endured. Not after the massive investment in Deshaun Watson. Not after bringing in Shedeur Sanders and igniting that conversation. The roster needs direction. The locker room needs clarity. The Browns aren't just rebuilding positions. They're rebuilding belief. And that brings us directly to the storm cloud hovering over this entire offseason, the quarterback room itself. Right next section for 400-500 words. And this is where things stop being strategic and start being chaotic. The quarterback room in Cleveland isn't just unsettled, it's unstable. On the surface, it appears that Shedeur Sanders will remain with the Browns. That much seems likely, but the question nobody inside that building is answering directly is simple: is he the starter? Because there's a difference between being on the roster and being the guy. Publicly, the organization says all the right things: competition, opportunity, evaluation, growth. It's the standard language teams use when they don't want to tip their hand, but privately, reports suggest scouts are still evaluating outside options. Calls are being made, names are being floated. That kind of mixed messaging creates tension. Fans want commitment, players want clarity, offensive linemen want to know who they're protecting, receivers want to know who they're building timing with. When uncertainty lingers at quarterback, it bleeds into every position group. And Cleveland has been here before. A revolving door under center, rotating reps, half-season auditions, open competitions that never truly settle anything. It sounds competitive on paper. In reality, it erodes chemistry. The hope, and right now it is just hope, is that Shedeur Sanders gets a legitimate shot to start. Not a temporary trial, not a short leash situation, a real opportunity with the offense structured around him. Because if you draft or acquire a young quarterback, the worst thing you can do is treat him like a placeholder. But hope isn't strategy. And the Browns haven't given anyone confidence that a final decision has been made. In fact, the opposite feels true. The language coming out of the front office suggests they're still scanning the horizon, still weighing alternatives, still hesitant to fully commit. That hesitation is dangerous. Because the NFL doesn't reward indecision at quarterback, it punishes it. If you're half in on a player, you're already behind. And then there's the shadow looming over all of it: the contract, the expectations, the baggage tied to Deshaun Watson. Until Cleveland resolves that piece, this quarterback conversation will never feel clean. Right, next section for 500 words. And now we have to talk about the contract. No one in Cleveland can escape. Deshaun Watson was supposed to be the solution, the franchise quarterback, the final piece that pushed the Browns into sustained relevance. The organization didn't just acquire him, they mortgaged their future for him. Historic guaranteed money, draft capital, public commitment. And what has it produced? Injuries, inconsistency, unanswered questions. Watson hasn't been able to stay on the field consistently. When he has played, the performance hasn't matched the investment. The explosiveness that once defined his game has flashed only in small stretches. And now, whether anyone wants to say it out loud or not, there's a real conversation about his role moving forward. Think about how dramatic that is. At the time of his signing, he was the highest-paid quarterback in NFL history. Now there are whispers that he may not even be the unquestioned starter. In some circles, there's talk that he should be insurance, not the centerpiece. That's a massive shift. But here's the uncomfortable reality: sunk cost cannot dictate future decisions. If the Browns truly believe Shedeur Sanders gives them a higher ceiling, they have to be brave enough to act accordingly. Pride can't run the quarterback room. Contracts can't run the depth chart. The smartest scenario might be simple. Define Watson's role clearly. If he's QB1, say it and build around him. If he's backup insurance, accept it and move forward. What they cannot afford is another offseason of layered ambiguity where nobody knows who's actually in control. Because ambiguity at quarterback spreads fast. It creates tension in practice. It divides reps. It fractures leadership inside the locker room. It forces coaches to hedge their messaging. And when training camp arrives with too many maybes, the entire offense suffers. Cleveland cannot run it back with chaos. They cannot head into another season with an overcrowded quarterback competition where everyone's competing and no one's secure. That's not healthy competition. That's instability. And based on what we're hearing, there's still a real possibility the Browns could add yet another quarterback to this mix. If that happens, this situation doesn't get clearer. It gets louder. Right next section for 500 words. And this is where things could spiral if Cleveland isn't careful. Because if the Browns head into training camp with another multi-quarterback showdown, it won't feel competitive. It'll feel chaotic. There's a massive difference between a two-man battle and a four-man circus. A clear QB1 versus QB2 competition, that's manageable. Reps can be structured. Leadership can develop. The offense can build timing with purpose. But when you stack 3 or 4 quarterbacks into the mix, nobody gets rhythm. Nobody gets continuity. And worst of all, nobody feels secure. That's how confidence erodes. We've seen it before around the league. Teams convince themselves that competition makes everyone better. In reality, extended uncertainty often does the opposite. Quarterbacks start pressing. They overthink. They try to win every throw in practice instead of mastering the system. Coaches split reps so thin that development stalls. And Cleveland is dangerously close to repeating that mistake. If training camp opened today and it was simply Watson versus Shedeur, that's clean. That defined. That's a real decision-making structure. But the messaging coming out of the front office suggests they're still exploring external options. Whether that's signing a veteran like Malik Willis, trading for someone like Mac Jones, or taking another swing in the draft. Every additional name added to the room increases instability. Because quarterbacks don't just compete, they command. And you can't have 4 potential commanders sharing the same locker room without confusion creeping in. Offensive linemen need to know whose cadence they're locking into. Receivers need consistent timing. Coordinators need to tailor game plans. A revolving depth chart makes all of that harder. And there's a bigger organizational issue at play here. If Cleveland appears unsure at quarterback, the rest of the roster feels it. Veterans question direction. Young players hesitate to buy fully in. Fans grow restless. The narrative becomes they don't know what they're doing. That perception matters. Which is why the Browns have to use OTAs and minicamp wisely. Identify QB1. Identify QB2. Settle the depth chart early. Remove unnecessary noise before it becomes a distraction that defines the season. Because while the quarterback room is the loudest fire in the building right now, there's another storyline quietly gaining heat, and it involves Andrew Berry preparing to make moves that could reshape this roster overnight. Right next section for 500 words. And while everyone is fixated on the quarterback carousel, another development is quietly picking up speed. Andrew Berry is about to get active. When Cleveland insiders start using phrases like big-time moves and everything is on the table, that's not casual language. Berry has a track record of being aggressive when he sees opportunity. He's not a sit-and-wait general manager. If there's value in the trade market, he'll explore it. And right now, the wide receiver market is buzzing. Reports suggest there's legitimate movement forming around veteran pass catchers, teams looking to reset contracts, teams looking to flip assets. Cleveland could absolutely enter that market as a buyer. On paper, it makes sense. The receiving core needs reinforcement. Playmakers change games. A true WR1 can elevate any quarterback. But here's the danger. Flashy upgrades are tempting. They generate headlines. They energize fans. They create off-season hype. But none of it matters if the offensive line can't protect whoever is throwing the ball. And that's the uncomfortable truth Cleveland cannot ignore. The Browns' offensive line has cracks, real ones, depth concerns, consistency issues. If the pocket collapses before roots develop, it doesn't matter how elite the receiver is. If the quarterback is constantly under pressure, progress stalls no matter who's under center. Trenches win football games. You can survive average receivers with strong protection. You cannot survive poor protection with elite receivers. It doesn't work that way. So if Barry is about to deploy premium draft capital or flip future assets in a trade, the question becomes, where are those resources going? If they go toward wide receiver while the line remains unstable, that's aesthetics over architecture. It looks good in March. It falls apart by October. Cleveland has lived that cycle before. But if those picks are directed toward securing tackles, reinforcing guard depth, building a wall in front of whoever wins the quarterback job, that's sustainable. And this is where Barry's legacy gets tested. Is he making proactive moves based on long-term structure, or reactive moves chasing immediate splash? Because one path rebuilds properly. The other keeps the Browns in perpetual reset mode. And as if that balancing act wasn't complicated enough, there's another name quietly surfacing in conversations. A draft piece that may already be on the move before fans even get comfortable. That situation could ripple beyond Cleveland. Write next section for 400-500 words. And that brings us to a name that hasn't dominated national headlines, but could quietly signal where this front office is headed. Dillon Gabriel. The chatter around Cleveland suggests he may not be viewed as part of the long-term plan. Local reporters aren't including him in serious quarterback discussions. He's rarely mentioned when analysts project the depth chart forward. It feels less like development and more like transition. And if that's true, it tells us something. Because moving on from a young quarterback asset, even subtly, is rarely random. It usually means the organization has already decided which direction it prefers. You don't quietly phase someone out unless you've mentally restructured the room. The interesting twist. Atlanta. There are growing whispers that Gabriel could land there, especially given the coaching carousel that reshuffled leadership across the league. Familiar connections matter in the NFL. Coaches bring in players they understand. Systems travel. Preferences follow. If Kevin Stefanski, now in Atlanta, sees value in a quarterback Cleveland appears lukewarm on, that creates a fascinating ripple effect. Not because Gabriel is guaranteed to be a star, but because it reinforces how fluid this entire offseason has become. Pieces are moving everywhere, coaches shifting cities, front offices recalibrating, quarterback rooms being rebuilt in real time, and Cleveland sits right in the middle of that storm. For the Browns, this isn't necessarily a loss if value comes back in return. That's the key. If Gabriel isn't in the long-term blueprint, flipping him for draft capital or depth assets makes sense. Every roster spot must serve a purpose. But here's what this really highlights. Nothing is stable. The quarterback room isn't settled. The offensive priorities are still being debated. Trade scenarios are actively forming. Draft strategy remains flexible. Even young assets are being evaluated for potential exits. This isn't a quiet rebuild. It's a pivot point. And pivot points define franchises. Because when multiple moving pieces align at once, quarterback uncertainty, trade market aggression, coaching shifts, it forces leadership to make decisive calls. Hesitation only multiplies chaos. The Browns are approaching that moment now. And the next decisions they make won't just affect one position group. They'll determine whether this offseason becomes the start of real structure or just another chapter of noise. Write next section for 400-500 words. And when you zoom out, the picture becomes crystal clear. The Cleveland Browns are at a crossroads. Not a small one, not a routine offseason adjustment, a real fork in the road that will define the next 3 to 5 years of this franchise. Every major pressure point is converging at once. Quarterback instability, offensive line cracks, draft capital sitting like loaded ammunition, a general manager known for bold moves, a new coaching staff trying to establish authority. This is not a casual offseason. This is a reset moment. Ty Monson steps into a locker room that needs clarity. Andrew Berry holds the keys to either stabilize the structure or shake it further. The quarterback room is overcrowded and undercommitted. The trenches need reinforcement, and every trade or draft decision will either reinforce foundation or distract from it. So what actually needs to happen? First, commitment. If Shedeur Sanders is the future, say it. Stop the layered messaging. Stop the public ambiguity. Give him the first team reps and build chemistry. If he's not the future, make that clear too. Half decisions create full problems. Second, define Deshaun Watson's role once and for all. Insurance, starter, trade candidate, whatever it is, clarity matters more than optics. You cannot build a unified offense around financial hesitation. Third, and this is critical, fortify the offensive line before chasing skill position fireworks. Protect the quarterback. Create running lanes. Stabilize the pocket. Without that, nothing else matters. Fourth, manage assets intelligently. If Dillon Gabriel or any other piece isn't part of the long-term vision, convert it into something that is. Nothing walks for free. Nothing drifts aimlessly. And finally, unify the message. When reporters are telling 5 different versions of what the Browns might do, that signals confusion. Confidence inside a building starts with leadership sounding certain. Players feel it. Fans feel it. Opponents feel it. Right now, Cleveland has talent. They have resources. They have opportunity. What they lack is direction. The next few weeks will reveal whether Andrew Berry's upcoming activity is strategic or reactive, whether these big moves are calculated steps forward or another round of splashy headlines that fade by midseason. Because in Cleveland, big moves haven't always meant good moves. This time they have to. Write next section for 400-500 words. And here's the part that should make every Browns fan sit up a little straighter. Big moves are coming. That much feels real. The signals are too loud. The messaging is too intentional. When an organization starts hinting that the roster is about to be reshaped, it usually means conversations are already happening behind closed doors. But here's the difference between franchises that ascend and franchises that spiral. Intent versus impulse. Andrew Berry being active isn't automatically a good thing. Activity alone doesn't equal progress. We've seen teams win the offseason before splashy trades, bold signings, aggressive draft swings, only to collapse once the real games start. Cleveland has lived that story. So the question isn't whether Berry will move pieces. It's whether those moves reflect a coherent plan. Is there a blueprint behind the aggression, a clear understanding of where the roster is headed? Or is this a front office trying to patch visible holes without addressing the structural cracks underneath? Because if you chase wide receiver headlines while ignoring offensive line fragility, that's optics. If you keep stacking quarterbacks without defining hierarchy, that's noise. If you trade draft assets without protecting the trenches, that's short-term thinking. And short-term thinking is how rebuilds quietly restart every 2 years. The opportunity here is massive. The coaching staff is new. That matters. New voices mean new accountability. The quarterback room, messy as it is, still holds upside. There is genuine talent in the building. The draft capital exists to fix real problems. The trade market is active enough to create leverage. Everything is aligned for a reset. But resets only work when the foundation is prioritized over the spotlight. This is a pivot point, a moment where Cleveland can either establish identity or continue drifting between versions of itself. A moment where the front office can either commit to a direction, fully, unapologetically, or hedge until uncertainty becomes the identity. The AFC North isn't waiting. Baltimore is stable. Cincinnati knows who their quarterback is. Pittsburgh always builds from the trenches outward. There is no margin for experimental chaos. If Cleveland wants to compete in that division, clarity must come first. Because the noise coming out of Berea right now is loud. The next move will tell us whether it's the sound of progress or the sound of another wheel spinning in place. Right next section for 400-500 words. And if you're a Browns fan, this is where the emotional tension really kicks in. Because you've seen this movie before. A promising offseason, aggressive headlines, big talk about reshaping the roster, then October hits and the cracks show again. Protection issues, quarterback uncertainty, chemistry that never quite clicks. By midseason, the narrative shifts from contender to what went wrong. That history is why this moment feels different and dangerous. The Browns don't just need activity, they need discipline. Every decision from this point forward has to connect to one core question. Does this make the offense structurally stronger? Not more exciting, not more marketable, stronger. If Shedeur Sanders is the future, the next moves must support him, protect him, stabilize him. If Deshaun Watson remains in the picture, his role must be defined cleanly and without ego. If another quarterback is added, there must be a clear developmental hierarchy, not a free-for-all. And above all else, the offensive line cannot be treated like a secondary priority. Because here's the reality no one wants to sugarcoat. The AFC North is brutal. Defensive fronts in that division don't give quarterbacks time to figure it out. They punish indecision instantly. If Cleveland doesn't fortify the trenches, none of the skill position upgrades will matter. That's not dramatic, that's football. The encouraging part, the opportunity is there. Cleveland has draft assets. They have cap flexibility if managed properly. They have a fan base starving for stability. They have enough talent to compete if the structure is sound. But structure requires courage. It requires saying no to splashy distractions. It requires committing to a quarterback without hedging. It requires resisting the urge to win the offseason instead of winning games. The Browns are standing at a fork in the road. One path leads to clarity, defined leadership, reinforced protection, and a quarterback room that finally makes sense. The other path leads to another year of noise, competitions, trade rumors, shifting narratives, and Sunday frustration. The next few weeks will decide which one they take. Because limbo doesn't last forever. Eventually, something gives. Here's the truth no one inside that building can escape. This isn't just about 2025. This is about the next half-decade of Cleveland Browns football. Franchises don't usually get clean pivot moments like this. New coaching voice, draft capital in hand, a quarterback room full of tension but also upside, a division that's competitive but not unbeatable. These moments are rare, and when they arrive, they demand conviction. Right now, Andrew Berry is holding the steering wheel. If he commits to a clear quarterback hierarchy and fortifies the offensive line, this franchise can stabilize fast. Development accelerates when players know who the leader is. Confidence grows when protection holds. Systems flourish when roles are defined early. But if the Browns drift into another season of layered uncertainty, another training camp full of, we'll see, messaging, they risk losing more than games. They risk losing trust. Players sense indecision. Veterans pick up on it. Young players internalize it. When leadership doesn't sound unified, it trickles down. And once doubt spreads through a locker room, it's incredibly difficult to contain. This is why the next few moves matter more than the headlines suggest. A trade for a receiver is exciting. A quarterback addition is dramatic. Draft night fireworks create buzz. But none of that defines a franchise the way disciplined roster building does. Cleveland cannot afford to chase optics. They must choose architecture over aesthetics. The AFC North isn't forgiving. Baltimore has identity. Cincinnati has stability under center. Pittsburgh builds from the trenches every single year. There's no room for confusion in that division. And here's the uncomfortable reality. The Browns have talent. They aren't empty. They aren't rebuilding from scratch. That's what makes this crossroads so pivotal. They are close enough to relevance that smart decisions could push them forward quickly. They are also fragile enough that reckless ones could reset the clock again. The next 5 years will be shaped in the next 5 weeks. And when the dust settles, we'll know exactly what kind of organization Cleveland has become. Calculated or reactive, disciplined or desperate. Because pivot points don't whisper, they reveal. Everything now comes down to clarity. The Browns have the assets, they have the talent, they have a new coaching direction and a general manager willing to move pieces. What they don't have, at least not yet, is a clearly defined plan that everyone inside and outside the building can feel. This offseason will answer one simple question: are these moves calculated or reactionary? Commit to a quarterback. Strengthen the offensive line. Stop hedging every decision. If Cleveland chooses structure over splash, this could be the moment the franchise finally stabilizes. But if they chase headlines and layer uncertainty on top of uncertainty, the cycle continues. The next few weeks won't just shape a roster. They'll reveal whether the Browns are building something real or just rearranging chaos again.